Here's the deal. I was wrong about quilts, and in today's video, I'm gonna go through the mistakes that I made early on in selecting and ordering a quilt for backpacking, and then talk about how my experience now after going back and revisiting quilts and getting the right product has really made the difference in having a good positive experience in the backcountry. It's about 5 or 6 years ago is when I purchased my first quilt for backpacking, which was from Hammock Gear. But since that time, I've used UGQ, Z-Packs, Outdoor Vitals, Zenbivy, you name it. I've been able to test a bunch of different quilts, but I ultimately, a couple years ago, decided I am done with quilts because I was just having so many bad nights of sleep. I was always feeling like I was sleeping cold and just not getting a good, comfortable, enjoyable night of sleep. So I said, we're going back to sleeping bags pretty much exclusively. And after a decent amount of time that I was like, okay, let's revisit quilts and see if there's something that I can do differently to make my experience better. The first mistake I made in choosing a quilt for backpacking is prioritizing weight over everything else. And ultimately what that ended up doing is creating a poor and negative experience when I was trying to get a good night of sleep in the backcountry. What I was solely focused on was in everything I was doing, trying to be as lightweight as possible. And when it came down to ordering a quilt, the issue that I had is I got a quilt that was too narrow and I got a quilt that was too short. Even though I got a 72-inch length quilt and I'm not even 6 feet tall, it just wasn't as long as it needed to be for me to really sleep comfortable and enjoy myself. But then second, I got a quilt that was too narrow. It just didn't provide enough coverage from side to side.
My Hammock Gear quilt is just not wide enough.
As a side sleeper and a pretty active sleeper that I am, for me to really eliminate drafts. So while I saved as much as a pound of weight in my backpack by going with the quilt that I ordered, it just wasn't the right product because it didn't give me a good, comfortable, warm, enjoyable sleep experience out on the trips that I was using it on. So then I tried a few other quilts at the time and I made some slight adjustments. I tried one that was a little bit longer, but it was still too narrow. And ultimately, I just decided I'm done with this. I'm tired of getting bad nights of sleep. So that's when I went back to using sleeping bags. Mistake number 2 that I made early on with my quilts is just simply forgetting that half of the warmth of your sleep system is your pad. So while I had made some adjustments in getting warmer quilts than I had got early on, I still was having some cold nights of sleep because on a quilt, you have your entire back piece here completely gone. And so your back is against the bare fabric of your sleeping pad. And if you don't have an adequate pad that is proven to keep you warm, then you are going to sleep cold. And that was absolutely my experience. Early on, I was sleeping on a Big Agnes Axle Air sleeping pad. And even though it was, I think a 3.2 R value is what it was rated for, that pad slept so unbelievably cold, and seems to be a trend with Big Agnes pads that they just sleep colder than what they are actually rated for. And so getting a pad like this Nemo Tensor All Season would make the biggest difference in making sure and ensuring that you get a good warm night of sleep. And as I've made those adjustments in sleeping on a much higher R value pad that is proven to actually insulate you from the cold ground, has made all of the difference in my recent experiences with using this quilt here and the Zenbivy bed systems that I've been using that are both quilt systems. So don't make that mistake yourself of what I did of just assuming that because the pad says it's insulated, that it's going to work. You want to have a system that works together, that keeps you warm and protected from the cold ground and the ambient temperature. So fast forward a couple years and let's talk about my experience with the Zenbivy light bed, because this is the product that really opened my eyes to, okay, you can actually get good, comfortable, enjoyable sleep in the backcountry using a quilt. Now there's a few extra components and such going on here that we'll touch on that make this an entire bed system. What's very specific to the Zenbivy is what I ordered when I first got one is I got the large size quilt because I was now sleeping on 25-inch wide pads. The large size quilt and sheet is meant for 25-inch wide pads, but that also meant that I was getting a longer and wider quilt than any of the other options that I had used previously from any other brand. So the large size light bed is a quilt length of about 80 inches and it's about 58 inches wide. So significantly longer and wider than any other quilt that I had used at the time. But there's also some things that the Zenbivy does that I really enjoy that I'll just touch on here real quick. You have the sheet that attaches to your sleeping pad that is this wing right here where you've got clips that pretty much make it so you eliminate drafts around the torso of the quilt. And you also benefit from you having a big baffle of down that is below where this attaches. So that's key for me because in a lot of cases, your pad attachments for pretty much any other quilt that I'd used are down at the very bottom edge of your quilt. And so anytime you move and shift around, because that's where that's attached, you have the option or the ability for you to open up that space and allow drafts into where you're sleeping. So because of the way that this is attached and the length of it, it just opened up so much more space. And I felt like I can move around in this, but I'm still getting enough coverage and protection from drafts and everything. It just really made such a difference in being able to get a very enjoyable night of sleep. But then I thought, what if I try this same concept on not a Zenbivy product and see how it functions if I go with a much longer and wider quilt than anything that I've done in the past. So now insert the UGQ Outdoor Bandit top quilt. This is a quilt that I've been using for the past few months and I want to share my experience with it because I've had other Bandit top quilts in the past, 2 or 3 of them in fact, and my kids have even used some youth Bandits. And while I still didn't have the right product, the UGQ Bandit, of all of the quilts that I had used, was the most enjoyable. It was the closest to getting the best sleep I could from the quilts I had used at the time. So when I was like, okay, I've learned what I've learned from the Zenbivy, now I want to try a whole new quilt and see if I can replicate what the Zenbivy has done for me. So what I did is when I ordered this one, I got it extra long and extra wide. So it's like over 78 inches long, I believe, and it is 60 inches wide. Now, I'm not a big guy. Like, I don't have huge broad shoulders and I'm not super tall. But what I have found from this is I get really, really good sleep because I've allowed myself enough space to move around. And with the dynamic tension control system that UGQ uses and has as an option for their quilts, when I tension that up, I have all of that extra width for it to really cocoon around me and not be excessively tight and shorten the quilt, because you are taking elastic and you are tightening it and it is shortening the length of it. Now that I've got it long and wide for ground sleeping, I'm getting really enjoyable sleep out of this. I even did a couple other extra things to it. I added some extra fill. I did a full insulated foot box and the draft collar at the top, the dynamic tension control. This is a premium quilt that is now giving me a really good sleep experience. And so those are the things that have really made the difference in me getting good sleep, that just made me realize that all those years I was wrong about quilts. So the key takeaway for this from me that I want to share with you is that #1 priority should be select gear for backpacking based off of function. What do you need that gear to do for you in the backcountry? Then secondary, worry about weight and fabrics and all of the fancy feature aspect things that maybe aren't totally necessary, but can aid in checking some of those boxes of the goals that you have for what you want that gear to do for you. Maybe it is weight. Maybe you want to save as much weight as possible, so you opt for a higher fill power down for the product you're selecting versus something else that is available, or maybe a tent. You want Dyneema to save that weight and budget isn't really an issue for you. But again, key takeaway, focus on function of the product first, then all of those other things, and I guarantee you, you will get products that work better for you, that provide a much more enjoyable experience because of that. And hopefully you can learn from the mistakes that I've made over the years around sleep systems and quilts specifically. So thanks for watching today, guys. If you're not subscribed to the channel, do subscribe. Hope you have an awesome day. We'll catch you on the next one. See you later.